Welcome to Anxious Tea Time, the show where we discuss the wonderfully different aspects of mental health.
I'm Ellie.
And I'm Gulli.
This week we're going to be discussing the mental health crisis in university students and hopefully share some tips and insights which can help those of us going to or already in university or a similar situation.
Right, and when we say mental health crisis in university students, we aren't just being hyperbolic. A lot of research suggests that in 2016, over 15,000 first-year students in UK universities reported that they had a mental health problem, compared to approximately 3,000 in 2006.
Could that just be due to the increased awareness of mental health problems?
That's a really good point, and there is definitely a lot more awareness of mental health, so those of us with mental health difficulties might have an easier time finding language and labels to describe our experiences. But I don't think that's the whole story. There is some data to suggest that there is a 210% increase in university students dropping out due to mental health problems, from around 10% of the people dropping out in 2010 to 15.6% dropping out in 2014. So there's definitely something going on just besides that people are talking more about it. But do you see this kind of statistics and numbers reflected in your peers, Ellie?
Yeah, I have some older friends who went to university beforehand, and most of them just sort of powered through, but in my year I actually have a few people who did actually drop out for a variety of reasons, but you can see that mental health is definitely increasing in university students, and you could definitely tell that there are many reasons why that's happening as well.
Yeah, definitely. But do you see any trends in terms of what course they do? When you talk about your peers, are you kind of relating to one course, or is it kind of across the board in a way?
I see it completely across the board. You can see it in many students. If you work in the students' union at several universities, you can see that there are higher reports and you need more social support of everything. But personally, a lot of the friends who I knew who dropped out were computer science students, and it is a course that demands a lot of work and knowledge, especially considering you're working on computers, but you have to remember a load of things off the top of your head, which can be very difficult for people.
Yeah, I definitely seen the same thing, and I honestly see it a bit more across the board. And I guess it do depend on who will actually talk about it and in what way you can see it. I think, you and I, for example, we're both psychology students, so it's not... it is to be expected that when we talk to our peers about difficulty we experience, we do have more of a language to talk about it, because we're able to more recognize symptoms for what they are. But if you just kind of talk to other people about stress and being really tired and being really, really panicked and even having panic attacks, it's very, very common, more so than I think most people would even expect. That just the kind of conversational topic of just almost dysfunctional university stress is very, very common.
It's something that everyone would experience anyway. A lot of people will say, I'm feeling anxiety about this, or I'm feeling stress. So when university students say, I'm feeling this way, everyone's like, oh yeah, but that's life, that's what happens when you grow up. But when you're in university, there are so many variables when you're there that will affect your mental health that you can't blame them for feeling this way.
Yeah, exactly, and I would love to do more of a deep dive on this later, but it's almost like a negative of mental health awareness. It's wonderful that we are now more aware of mental health problems, especially depression, anxiety, etc. But in some way it can kind of be hard to get your point across. Because if you are genuinely struggling with something that is really, really affecting your life to a very dysfunctional degree, and you can try to share this with your peers, it's very easy to kind of get oh yeah, I'm stressed too. And they will genuinely mean it. And it's very hard to kind of sort out what is just, it's university, it's life, it's of course going to be difficult, and what is actually a problem, and how are you able to kind of distinguish, right? Because I found that personally, that it's very hard to compare how I'm doing to any kind of baseline.
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming that in maybe other parts of your life that you kind of have some kind of consensus to measure yourself to in terms of where you are with your work, how you're feeling, how your day is looking, and if you kind of deviate too much from that, you're maybe something is up. However, like, if you speak to any student, like, our lives look completely different. People have so many different things going on that it's just very hard to see, well, what is actually a legitimate problem and what is just part of university.
Yeah, no, it's a very complex issue considering how stressful being in higher education is in the first place. Because of something that we wanted to discuss at some point was the academic pressure and the complete jump, which means that can have an effect on mental health, but that just affects a person overall anyway. So there's a gradual difficulty change in every academic anyway.
Oh, yeah.
So you can go from infant school to junior school to secondary school, and then there's that small jump for college where you have to make your own choices because there's this curriculum you follow, and this is when you start making these choices. But then there's that huge jump to university because if you're expected to do so much more and not everyone is doing it. So this is something that you have chosen as an option for your life instead of doing something else. So you're expecting it to just be one easy flow like all the rest has, but there's such a massive jump that can have such an impact and stress and surprise for people.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, university is definitely harder to do academically, but also not only is it difficult, but the same way it was in sixth form where, well, it's difficult, but we got to do it. Now you have the additional doubt of, well, is this even what I want to do? Maybe I'm not even good at this. Maybe I should be doing other things because we're still very early on in our life, most of us. And then how do you decide if, like, is this generally just like the course being difficult, or is just this not the right thing for me? Did I make the wrong choice? But overall, I think you have some universal stresses for university students, or for most of us anyways, in terms of their financial stress of student debt. Like, there's so much research, like, through like all the walks of life, how financial stress can be really, really detrimental to your mental health. I mean, it's very intuitive too, right? Like, if you constantly have to worry about money, bills, allocation, like how you do with everything, of course, that's not good for you.
Yeah, see, it's different in so many ways when it comes to financial stress as well, because you can get the maintenance loan from the government, which is money that you get to help yourself through university, and sometimes that's just not enough for everyone because they don't take into consideration that you have to pay your student accommodation rent, you also have to pay for your books, but you also have to pay to sustain your mental health in a way, because you can't just focus on your education, you have to focus on, I need to go outside sometimes, I need to be able to relax, I need a certain amount of food to get me through the day, but you don't know how long that money is going to last, especially as a first year student. You have the basics to pay, like your rent, and you create this budget based off little information, so you don't know if it'll actually work because you don't know what you'll buy, what you'll eat, how much you'll travel to university.
Oh yeah, definitely. I grossly miscalculated things when I first came. I did try my best in making a budget, and some things cost way less than I thought it would be, and other things cost way more, and it's just a very hard thing to get used to because we all are used to somewhat managing our money, but it's just a completely different degree of having to navigate everything. And I really like what you said about maintaining your mental health, because you need to eat, you need to be social, but to sometimes do that, it does cost more money. You have the kind of joke and stereotype of, haha, students living on noodles. That's not good for you at all. Again, nutrition is directly related to your mental health. And in terms of socializing with friends, I mean, we're lucky in a university you might have more society events and things you can go to for free, but just meeting up with a friend and getting coffee, well, that's £3, if not more, every time, and it gets very, very difficult to navigate, especially when you're not expecting it.
Yeah, especially considering you're in a whole new social situation for yourself, and some people don't end up going to universities with their friends that they previously went to school with, so you're thrown into this entirely new social group, and you almost want to make this great first impression, and you don't want to be that person who keeps saying no all the time, so you end up spending quite a lot of money on just going outside and doing things. And if you're an international student like yourself, or if you moved across the country like I did, you want to go out and experience the new city that you're in as well.
Oh, definitely.
So you just want to see everything, but that also costs money, so that money that you get for rent and utilities and food, it doesn't quite stretch enough, and you get more stressed of, I want to go outside because if I want to be be happy, but oh wait, I don't have a lot of money in my bank account. And that is also like a common student problem joke of just, there's nothing in my bank account, I have £4 and
I mean, my overdraft. Yeah. And I think that touches on the more transitional aspect of universities, because financial stress in itself is horrible for you, but this tying into the transition, that most of us, even if you live in the same city and are going to university for ahead of time, it's still a transition. And for the both of us who moved from very far away, it's just a transitional part. We're just like, okay, it's a new space, it's a new city, but just like, as you were saying, a new social situation, different customs, different everything, and just navigating that and going from most of us living with a pretty okay family who kind of took care of you and kind of made sure you ate once in a while and that you didn't, like, you ate some healthy foods, you somewhat got some sleep, you're kind of quote unquote forced to socialize with someone every day because you see your family, and then going to the situation where you're completely in control of yourself. You might not have a lot of friends. We knew no one when we came up here. You have to deal with your budget. You need to manage everything. Like, that's a really stressful transition. It's an exciting one. It was for me, but like, it's very, very stressful.
It's especially difficult considering you're thrown from being completely dependent on the people around you, because you have like this spider web of people around you that you can depend on. So when you're in university, even if you have come from the same place, you still have this degree of independence you have to get used to. And for most people, it's terrifying because there's so many aspects of your life that you have to take care of now. You're no longer your parents' baby. So you've got to feed yourself, you've got to figure out how expensive stuff is. Like, the biggest surprise for me is how expensive cheese was. That was insane. But with like independence, you've got to make new friends, which for some people is extremely difficult, and you have to get yourself into social situations that you hadn't been before. Like we talked previously about the societies, it's a great way of meeting new people, but obviously there are still cliques and stuff that you don't expect to be. You think that everything is going to be so different but the same. It's a very complex situation that you're thrown in at a potentially very young age.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of touches on, well, in terms of living with a family before university, I think a lot of people living together with their family do a lot more self-care and positive things for their mental health without realising it, because self-care is kind of a word that's getting thrown around a lot now and it's becoming a bit trendy, and being very conscious of like, oh, taking a day off, taking care of yourself, which is wonderful, but self-care to me at least is very like, oh, just being responsible for yourself, being your own parent in a way. And I also think the kind of increased mental health difficulties can just come from that people just do less self-care. Like, say if you live at home with your, supportive family maybe, and you might have some tendencies towards any kind of mental health problem, a very supportive family can definitely keep that in check. Not like very actively, but we're just like, oh, you have your social group, you interact with your family has some shared meals, you eat somewhat healthily, you somewhat have to keep a sleep schedule because you can't be waking the entire family up. And even if you don't realise it, that's all really good things to do for your mental health. And then, as you were saying, with this newfound independence and responsibility, you might maybe not prioritise it as much as you really should, because you haven't known anything else, and suddenly you're making these almost horrible decisions for your mental health, but you're just not aware about how detrimental they are. For me personally, my first day, I was like, well, I don't need that much sleep. Like, I'm not like waking up anyone. I can just do whatever I want. If I want to stay up super late to do whatever, I just can. But turns out a dramatic lack of sleep is very bad for you. Yeah. Who knew?
It's also difficult to keep track of yourself in certain ways, because you don't really see yourself changing in such a dramatic way. Like, your mental health could change and you would have no idea. So now you're not surrounded by those people who are around you 24/7. That, you have these new friends, but they don't know how much you've changed between that short period of time. So you're right when you have these family members around you that if you change and have a dip in something, that they can be like, oh, hey, so what's going on? And you have that supportive background around you. In university, they do try. Like, we go to Northumbria University and you can see posters everywhere that they try and support you in many different ways, but it's very difficult to actively get into that situation where you're like, yeah, I do need help. It's normally a massive thing that will happen where you're like, oh, yeah, my mental health has taken a staggering turn.
Yeah.
But it takes a while for you to realise that, and sometimes it can be too late for you to realise. And it's a difficult situation to be in, especially if you've moved across the country and you're feeling alone about it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that kind of touches on the loneliness aspect of it, because what we're talking about now is more relevant to first year or foundation year students, like the original transition from safe at home for most of us to a new situation. Everything is new and scary, need to figure it out, because obviously that in itself is terrifying to a certain extent. But again, like this mental health crisis isn't just in first year students. Yeah. Right, it's not just first year students who don't recover and then whatever. Like these problems are throughout university, and especially loneliness. There was some data recently that found through a survey that 1 out of 6 university students felt that they didn't really have a true friend, like in university. And not only is loneliness obviously horrible for you, but I would assume it's even more so because university is kind of known for being like, oh, like the most social part of your life. It's so easy to make friends. Everyone is socializing. There's always something that you can do. And then like still so many of us sit there not really feeling we're fitting in, don't really feel like we have friends. And then of course you have social media and just the stereotypes of university where like everyone have these big friend groups, everyone's going to parties all the time, everyone are involved with these different things, and that's very difficult. I think like I definitely struggled with that when I first came to Newcastle, but again I didn't know anyone in the entire country, and sitting there to be like, I'm completely alone. What do you do with that? I mean, I think both of us were quite lucky eventually. Like, we didn't end up making a lot of good friends. Yeah. But it's very daunting, isn't it?
You made a really good point about the stereotypes of university. So, like, so many people will tell you so many different things, like, oh, it's nothing like school. It's completely different. The education way is different. And then you go there and you have these expectations, and when they're not met, it's almost disappointing. Even though it's a perfect situation to be in, and it could be perfect, your course could still be amazing. You have these expectations and stereotypes of university that when you get there and you don't get these expectations and you are feeling alone, you're expecting, oh, all of these people around you are doing the same course as you, therefore it'll be a way of you to relate to them, so you're able to gain friendships that way. But it's not always that easy. So feeling alone at university can be very easy almost, because of you have these expectations of, like, we have societies, oh, I like gaming, you like gaming, but it's also about personality as well. So it is very common for people to feel lonely in university.
Yeah, because then you realise that, well, making friends is really difficult from scratch. Because at least for me back home, like, well, you make friends, but a lot of the friends you make are, oh, you become friends with your friends' friends. Yeah. And just kind of, the web kind of spreads from there. Well, here you are, no, like, you just need to interact with strangers and hopefully you have a good kind of chemistry, and then I guess we're friends now and it works out. But again, that's like if you already struggle socially, because I'm lucky, I'm quite an extroverted person, which really helped me out coming to university. But even if you're very introverted, as I know you are a bit more leaning towards, like, that's such a challenge, because you really, really need to put yourself out there in a way that you probably haven't done before.
Exactly. It can be difficult, and throwing yourself in that situation can be so stressful, especially if it doesn't work out, because it won't work out with everyone. It's not going to be like the first person you walk up to university, say, hey, I'm new, and they go, oh, I'm new too, hey, you want to be friends with everyone? Yeah, sure. That is not always how it'll work. So in university, you're put in more of a position where you have to keep trying in every aspect. Education-wise, you may not get the best score in your first assessment, but you can't just be like, okay, I can't do this course anymore.
Yeah, and keep trying.
And it's the same with friendships. You can't just be like, oh, no, this one friendship didn't work, so none of them are going to work. So you're put in so many positions where you have to keep trying, and if you already came to university with a mild mental health difficulty, then it just almost fuels it and makes it so much worse.
I completely agree, and I think university have some very unique pitfalls. Just to kind of touch on the topic of alcohol and drug use, for example. It's not that alcohol and drugs are very specific to university, but for a lot of us, it's often the first time we kind of have the complete freedom to engage with them however we want.
Yeah, because university is that first milestone you get to tell you that you are an adult, and it's also your first milestone of being that independent person where you've made this decision, this is your type of thing to do. So it's you're experimenting with university in the first place, because obviously it's not something that everybody does. You either get a job, go to university, or do something else.
Yeah.
So it's almost that push to experiment in other ways. You're an adult now, you get to make these choices, so alcohol and drugs becomes sort of like a norm in a situation like this, which is kind of odd.
It is quite odd, but I remember, especially my first year, feeling like, I could just do that now. I have the option to. And just knowing I have the full option to was like, I want to do this now. Even though, like, before university, I've never been much of a drinker, and I really haven't engaged with any kind of drugs because I'm not the person to do that. But seeing the kind of new social setting, and again, as we were mentioning, the kind of, like, expectations of the university, it's like, oh, time to party. Like, it's, yeah, you have to do this now. Or not even have to, but, like, you have this free access to it. And again, like, I don't mean to demonize alcohol or drug use by any means. Obviously, people have a very different relationship to it, but it's definitely a skill you need to learn, like how much is good for you or others, and how should you navigate that, because we all have different family histories and different personalities and different circumstances. And even though, like, a lot of us maybe have experience with alcohol or even drugs before, it's the first time with such, again, independent and free exposure to it.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the stereotypes of university, and one of the largest stereotypes is that university is almost like party culture.
Yeah.
You're all being thrown into this independence, so you're like, we can do whatever we want. So we sort of get in this habit. People drink to either, like, calm down, sort of a relax after a session, and there's so many bars around university anyway. Like in Northumbria we have Habita, which is a bar that we have literally inside the university. So there is that stereotype of party culture in university.
Yeah, because that, again, it messes with your baseline, what to compare yourself to, because if you want to drink at 3 p.m. basically every day, there's people you can do that with. It's very common to almost go out every single day, and it's therefore very hard to pick up on when that becomes dysfunctional for you, or even to see in other people, because it isn't uncommon to be drinking a lot. And for a lot of us, that's just, oh, it's just university, you're having a good time, you'll calm down eventually, you know what you're doing. But for some of us, it can be very destructive, just really hard to pick up on.
Yeah, there's also been like a lot of scientific studies to do with alcohol and mental health in the first place, and it has been proven to affect it negatively.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Especially when alcohol initially highlights your underlying thoughts and processes anyway. So if you're feeling sad before you get drunk, it escalates it significantly. So when you do wake up the next morning, you are going to feel absolutely awful, and especially on the night out, you may do something silly because you're in a really bad mood or you're upset, and it exacerbates the emotions that you feel.
Yeah, and then again, it's not an either or thing. I mean, there's a lot of us who choose just not to drink or engage with alcohol, which is a very, very fair choice. But then again, then you might feel a bit hindered because a lot of the social situations do include alcohol. And you don't want to be drinking every day probably, but you need to find this really weird balance just from trial and error. And unfortunately, those errors can be very detrimental to your mental well-being.
Oh yeah, and that's why it's so important to look for support and be mindful of your own well-being.
Oh yeah, definitely. And keep in mind that most universities, especially now, do provide a ton of services to support the students, because they, if anyone, I'm really aware that, like, students do experience a lot of mental health difficulties. I know, like, our university, for example, and this is very common, do offer some kind of counselling services. I know ours also do mental well-being workshops in terms of social skills and how to handle stress and anxiety. And I think most universities do have a lot more to offer and to support you with than you think, just in terms of just knowing, letting your lecturer know what's up, how are you doing. You can get extensions and just be more vocal than you think you should, because again, like, it's very common with these mental health problems. So the universities and the staff you're in touch with have seen it before. You're not the first person to need an extension after something happened. You're probably the 500th your lecturer has seen. And I think that's very important to be mindful of.
Yeah, and you also have to bear in mind that if you don't want to talk to your university, you can go to your doctor or GP if you're worried, and they can refer you to so many different places around where you live, because there is help everywhere. If you don't feel like that you can talk about it with your friends and family, you can go to the doctors and get it sorted. Either way, you can either get some sort of therapy, you can get medication or anything. There are also ways you can help yourself. Like, you may feel like a day in is a day wasted, but you need that cool down time. Just because you've spent a day in bed, it isn't wasted because it's a way of helping yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to touch on that when we speak about this kind of support and tips to manage your well-being better. A lot of them, you have to be very proactive about them. They're very active, and that can be incredibly difficult when you're already going through a rough time. Not just sending an email or walking to someone's office or being vulnerable at a time where you're already going through so much can be very, very difficult, because a lot of these things, except for what you just mentioned, is you have to go out of your way to do it. You have to have the energy, you need to have the confidence and the kind of extra motivation to do it, which is often the source of the problem you're having. Like, you don't have any motivation, you don't have any energy. So I think it is incredibly important to reach out just to your friends or family or lecturers or anyone, definitely. But I think that shouldn't be the only advice that's given out, because that's not always viable for everyone. But I think that we kind of have talked about a bit in the past, the kind of consciousness of your own well-being in your own life is very important.
Yeah, but you also have to think about, when we mean proactive, it could be from anything of just going outside and going out and getting food to literally just doing a bit of work.
Yeah,
just because of it's a small thing to someone else, it doesn't mean it has to be a small thing to you.
Oh, that's very, very true. And just kind of, I know self-care is thrown around a lot, but there's definitely a lot of good things about trying to be more mindful and responsible. If how you eat, if you don't eat enough, or maybe not getting the right nutrition you need, that can be a good starting point. Like, well, okay, I don't feel the best after eating these kind of things. Maybe I'll try to eat a bit more vegetables. So, I do feel really bad after a long night of drinking. Maybe I'll try to do that less. You can be more conscious of your relationships, what people make me feel good and happy and energetic, and what people seem to just really stress me out, and how do I work the best? How do I manage uni work the most efficiently? So there's definitely a lot of tips and small things like that you can do, but I think the key to all of it is definitely the consciousness about, because again, a lot of these tips might not work for everyone, because people are different. Some people feel better after just, maybe a good distraction, going out with some friends, forgetting about your problems for a little bit to get a break, whilst for other people it can be very stressful and you end up having a terrible time. And just kind of learning about how you work the best in the way and what's good and beneficial for you, and also how that can change depending on circumstances.
Oh yeah, definitely, I completely agree, but that will be our time up today. This has been Ellie
and Gulli,
and this has been Anxious Tea Time with Anxious Minds.